Chapter 1. The Future. Ever since her father's exposure to radioactivity in the future was now a reoccurring nightmare to Anna. It troubled her, and barely gave her a moment's rest, as the only question she now asked was what awaited the human race. Anna thought it was a course to be worried about, as every day brought a new kind of danger. The world already dealt with pollution, intense global warming, economic crisis, and wars. What more was strong enough to make the Earth a wasteland? There were so many ways this could all play out before her very eyes. She wanted answers for herself, so she had been asking her father when he would return from what he would call his trips to find an answer for himself. He always said that he knew little when he returned from his latest trip, only knowing that there was a great need. Her father, who was a scientist, always tried to reassure her that he'd be back before long, and that he would return with something more concrete than the last visit. At first, Anna wasn't worried. This was her father, and every scientist had his obsession. But ever since his last trip, and with how sick he was, she had him hospitalized, only to discover that he was ill from radioactivity. This had left her heart in her throat and caused her to feel sick to her stomach until she could no longer sit still and pace the length of the hospital corridor. As a result, every so often, when she'd been too distracted or nervous to even notice, she found herself pacing and muttering to herself instead. What made her father sick? Where did he go to? Before her father died, every time she went looking for answers, she found them buried under layers and layers of information she couldn't hope to get straight away. And each day brought some sort of danger, whether it be nuclear or nuclear weapons being released on the world. All of the world's resources could run dry at any given moment, and if they didn't, then all the people could suffer the same fate as her dad's, as if there were no tomorrow. Anna never knew her dad to do anything without reason. If he came home late or with some excuse to not be disturbed, it was obviously work-related, and she understood that. However, standing before Anna in the very room she never knew existed was a time machine. And having to learn from her father's scientists, who were now her scientists since he willed the company over to her, Anna was amazed to discover that this had been here the whole time. And it actually worked. A time machine, Anna muttered. She felt a tingle down her spine, goosebumps rising up on her arms. She took a step forward and stared intently at the machine, like it might explode or fly off into the distance with all her strength. But that didn't happen. Everything remained still. Anna wondered if maybe she'd gotten it all wrong. Her eyes glanced around the floor, but she saw nothing except the white floor tiles, which looked almost perfectly normal from her perspective. She stepped closer to it, examining it closely. The front of it was made of metal, the entire shape shaped like a square, with an oval window on its side. It appeared to be able to turn on, but she hadn't seen any buttons or levers on either of the sides, or at least none that she could see. Anna frowned and looked toward the center of the machine, where there was another window, this one slightly bigger than the others. There she could just make out two buttons that didn't look like they would have a purpose. Her hands moved toward the button closest to her, and she pulled it down, staring at the panel of lights that lit up immediately. Then she pressed down on the other switch and watched with fascination as the panels on both sides lit up completely, revealing letters written in black ink. Anna jumped slightly, startled at the sudden voice. Her heartbeat quickened, and she looked down at the screen, squinting at it to read. When she finally managed, she blinked, trying to process what was happening. Was her mind playing tricks on her? No way. This machine definitely functioned, or else there wouldn't be anything there, right? It wasn't possible that... Could time travel really exist? She shook her head. There must have been some mistake, because surely this couldn't be real. The scientist closest to her, David Smith, he was called,
If you're aiming to test it, may I suggest you go in with a protective gear?
Said. Anna turned to look at him. This was what my father traveled into? A few of the scientists sorrowfully looked down to the floor, but David, wearing a sad expression, nodded glumly.
Yes, Miss Lewis,
he said. Anna's eyes stung from the tears which she held back. This, then, was what had killed her father. His curiosity. The future. But then, he hadn't told anyone about this machine, and the scientists working with him were all sworn to secrecy, as they had even signed to not divulge any company secrets. What was he looking for? Anna asked.
Answers, Miss Lewis,
David said.
There were inconsistencies in our world, and certain repetitions he needed to be sure of. He wanted to gather enough data to share with the world government on state of the world on the future, and there were certain things he wanted them to abolish, like nuclear weapons, and anything that could lead to a large-scale wipeout of the human race. He wanted them gone. We didn't agree with this, nor were we ready to do such a thing ourselves, so we kept quiet while he collected those things he needed for his research. However, I'm sorry, Miss Lewis, but after he finished collecting those things and sending it back to us, it was no longer safe to travel anymore.
Why not?
No one knows for sure. Something happened that led to the current state of affairs.
You mean what happened to my father? Anna asked.
Yes,
David said. Anna nodded solemnly.
It was all in order to prevent any accidents from occurring and create more opportunities for people to help one another during times of distress.
David explained.
Our research shows that these sorts of experiments can be extremely dangerous and can affect the environment drastically.
You're saying the time machine may have made the environmental down there harmful as of the time he left, or when he returned? Anna asked.
There's every likelihood that your father came back with traces of the future. However, we've checked the room, and it's absolutely free of all traces of radioactive matter. So it's either he was infected in the future, or...
David shrugged without finishing, as if saying it would further annoy her. Anna knew what was more likely. Her father got infected in the future. What year did he go to?
The year 2730, Miss Lewis.
That far? Why did her father have to travel that far into a future that didn't concern him? Should he have visited one of the nearest futures instead? What was wrong with him? Now he hadn't just gotten himself infected, he was also dead, and she wasn't able to ask him the things he had seen, because ever since he closed his eyes, due to how weak his body was, he never opened them. But what disaster was in the year 2730 anyway? And why did he have to go that far? Anna could feel the curiosity had driven her creeping into her. This wasn't exactly the first time she questioned her father's life choices. She began to understand where he was coming from. But was it too late to bring his memories back? Would her father's knowledge come with the knowledge that could save lives and bring humanity back together? For as long as she had lived, she remembered reading books that detailed the history of this world, especially the one he spoke of, and how it seemed as though he had been born with the ability to control time itself. She wanted to know everything she could possibly find out, no matter how terrible it seemed. Why had he gone to that specific year which had gotten him infected with radiation? What really was in the year 2730? War? Genocide? Did someone really start a war and kill millions of innocent people? How could he say it was all right? That he wanted to prevent it from all starting? Anna didn't want to believe him, but the science she was studying said that it was true. Even if it meant risking everything to stop something that seemed to be inevitable at best. He was going through the effort of finding something to protect the future she didn't understand. And if Anna learned everything from her father's travels, it will always be cautious. Whatever he was doing, whatever dangers were lurking at the end of his path, he wanted the world to know about it. By keeping this machine, he was ensuring the safety of the future that didn't involve him. And now, to get an accurate report, she would have to retrace his steps back to the year 2730 to see what he was too sick to put down. "You said it wasn't safe to travel?" Anna said.
"Yes, Miss Lewis."
David said. "Well, I believe there are gears that one can use to prevent oneself from radiation. Surely we have that."
"Yes, we do. What are you trying to attempt, Miss Lewis?"
Anna turned to face the machine. "Time travel, obviously. I need to see what my father saw." She turned to look at David. "I need to know so that I can warn them of what the future holds. Perhaps that path can be changed."
"It's human nature, Miss Lewis. Sooner or later, they would want to destroy themselves."
"Then it would a future I would be pushing further back. At least, that way, we'll get to save a lot of lives." He stared at her, his expression unreadable. A long silence followed, and Anna thought he wouldn't reply, until finally he slowly started to nod.
"Very well, Miss Lewis. We will help you."
Anna swallowed nervously and nodded silently. She didn't know much about the time machine, but she was very nervous to even be attempting it. She would be walking in her father's footsteps, but she would have to be cautious to find out all her father knew. For now, all that mattered was making sure that it was still safe to travel. Otherwise, who knew what kind of trouble the future might cause? Anna slowly reached out her hand to push the button that started the machine, watching anxiously at the numbers counting downward on the screens. But nothing changed. Nothing but light appeared above, signaling her that she was successful, before the words disappeared, leaving nothing behind. She glanced around the room once more, taking notice of the buttons that appeared on the panels of lights as the machine went off. There was one at each corner that had a small red light flashing. She turned away from the console and stood quietly beside Dr. Smith and the other scientists, waiting patiently for the next part of the machine to begin. After a few moments passed by, they waited in silence, listening carefully for any signs of a malfunctioning device or any loud noises. When nothing happened, everyone let out a sigh of relief before the door in front of her slid open. Two groups of scientists walked up to Anna with a silver anti-radioactive suit. They helped her into it, then strapped various gadgets onto her person. They then pressed buttons and connected various wires attached to her suit. Then they stepped back, looking pleased with their work. Anna stepped into the time machine. David walked up to her.
"Are you really sure of this, Miss Lewis?"
Anna showed him her thumb.
"We've upgraded the helmet so that it can be able to record and bring back all that you see."
David added.
"Now I'll close the door and input the year 2730. We will see all that you see when you return. Do not take off your protective gear."
Roger that. David closed the doors of the time machine. He moved the control panel and entered the year 2730. Seconds later, the time machine lit up bright blue before beginning to hum loudly as its engines began to whir.
"The machine is programmed to bring you back when you push the green button on your suit."
David said.
"And that button, Miss Lewis, will take you to the year 2730.
Anna nodded and pushed the button. Chapter 2. Instantly, Anna was standing before an entirely different scenery. She was right in the middle of a street, with destroyed and damaged buildings and cars on either side, and it looked like she had taken a trip into a parallel universe, as the place looked recognizable, like somewhere she had been to before, although she could feel that something was not quite right. The buildings were made entirely from metal and glass instead of concrete, and they all looked destroyed. The sun wasn't shining, as there was dark polluted clouds covered the sky. Everything around her felt cold and lifeless, with not a single person visible in sight. Even the streets appeared to be empty, devoid of any human life but her own. However, what was even more peculiar than the fact that they were inside another world was the fact that it seemed like the entire world had ended at least a few decades ago. What happened? She gasped out, looking around in wonderment. The only sound was her own voice. There wasn't so much as a peep from the dead world around her. No grasses, or if there were, they were dead. no trees, no sign of anything alive. It was a gray world without a color of life. No colors, nothing, just black, gray in every direction. It really gave her goosebumps. It was as though everyone else was gone. No one else here, at least. Anna realized it immediately. This was the future, the year 2730. Although Anna felt the comfort of her suit that provided her with air and made her feel safe from the radioactive environment, she couldn't help but feel dread as she felt like the only living thing in this environment. Anna looked around and saw nothing except a tornado in the distance. The destroyed buildings watched her, but didn't make a single noise. The entire world stood still as though nothing would ever happen, and almost silently, like an audience waiting for her to make the first move. But the whole world had come to an end, or at least it was the picture it painted. As she walked deeper into the ruined city, she saw stagnant water with the bones of submerged inside. By the side was a black, obviously polluted river flowing, and Anna couldn't help but gulp when the sight of bones of a giant shark being pushed by the river caused her to jump back and fall onto her butt. There were no plants or flowers or grass to be found anywhere. All there were buildings and ruins. Nothing was left behind, not a single person. But something was wrong. It looked as though the whole planet was deserted, as though everything had died. Just as suddenly as it began, the storm stopped in its tracks. All that remained after this massive attack was silence. It was so quiet that you could hear your own heart beating inside your chest. A loud rumble erupted from within the tornado. The winds rose up violently as it expanded outward, sending a shockwave through the atmosphere. A deafening sound filled Anna's ears as it grew until it became too loud for her to bear. Suddenly, everything went silent again. She dared open her eyes slowly, only to see that the tornado had vanished. Anna walked further to see crashed warplanes, burnt and rusted tanks, and destroyed military trucks, with what was unmistakably bullet shells. Had there been a war? Or was it something entirely that caused the extinction of the human race? Well, there was no one around to ask. She needed more proof. The protective anti-radioactive suit she wore did keep her informed of the level of pollution, and Anna was certain that this was what had killed her father. The air was harmful, the water polluted. It was as if nature was out to destroy all forms of life in its attempt for a do-over. Or was this truly the end? If this was the case, then what was next? She wanted answers more than anything. She needed someone who knew how the world worked. She needed someone to tell her what had just occurred. She needed to know if anyone could find a way to stop it, and maybe help survivors survive. So many questions swarmed her head, but Anna tried to remain calm. At least, that's what her parents taught her to do. Stay calm even though you can hardly breathe. So she tried. She really did. She took deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth, and repeated this action for several minutes until her breathing calmed down enough that she knew she could actually walk forward to explore the wreckage. When she leaves here and returns to the present, what would she say to the world to have them believe she just saw the future? For this, she knew wasn't enough. She needed something, anything she could go back with to convince them that the very weapons and techs they thought kept them safe were vessels that would help hasten the end. They would need proof of all of this. Maybe in the distant future, when things were better, she could try to convince people to trust technology instead of violence. Maybe she should write about this in a book, because maybe it could help them understand that these technologies aren't as evil as they're made out to be. Maybe if she could show them the truth, maybe they'd realize that the world is a good place now. If only she could talk to her father. But that was impossible. He was deaf. She wouldn't get the chance to explain her situation until little over 2 years later, which wasn't so far away. Or at least, there in her lab. She could build something to be able to bring proof. Only the videos of this place would be proof enough. Anna picked up a small piece of debris off the ground and inspected it. She knew it wasn't part of an explosion, and yet there wasn't a mark anywhere on her body, despite the fact she must have passed through a huge chunk of space that was blown up in her future. Anna put the fragment in her pocket and continued to look around herself. The rubble looked old and some parts of it were covered with rust. As Anna continued with her inspections of the future Earth's ruin, she came across a strange metal object buried in the mud. She kneeled to pick it up. It looked like a gun. A futuristic gun. It had several tubes attached to it, including 2 that ran from the barrel, and they were sticking out of the gun as they extended downwards and connected to a large battery. It also reminded Anna vaguely of one of the guns she used to play with when she was younger. She could remember playing games with her cousins that involved shooting bullets. She wondered what these weapons were capable of, and what exactly was going on here. She held the gun and turned towards another object. It was an enormous machine with lots of buttons and dials. It was in front of an array of switches that could be pulled at will. Her curiosity got the best of her. She quickly flipped one of the switches on the control panel. A green light flashed. Anna pressed another switch, and once again, the light turned red, meaning that the machine was running, and she pressed another button. After that, she did what she wanted to do, pressing every single lever she could find. It was incredibly frustrating trying to figure out which switch did what. She had no idea how she could pull this lever so fast and not cause it to explode and kill her. Finally, she grabbed the next lever and pulled. There was a bright flash of blue light, and then she heard the sound of a heavy metal door opening. Her eyes widened, and she quickly threw the lever upwards. The door closed and locked itself again. The light from outside got weaker, but there wasn't even a single window. Anna felt completely lost without any indication of what was going on anymore. She let out a frustrated sigh and sat on the floor, leaning against the machine. How long had she already spent walking through this world? For a brief moment, Anna felt scared. What if she couldn't go back home? It was the same feeling when she woke up from another nightmare. Fear crept up from deep within her and froze her body. She looked at the green button on her suit that was supposed to ensure her return. They had assured her that it would bring her back to the present. I'm done seeing all I need to see, Anna wondered. Deciding to walk a bit further, Anna noticed a strange skull and walked up to it. What was this? Or what sort of creature was this? She analyzed it with the data of the suit, and it did know what it was. Some type of reptile. Something caught her eye from behind the skull. It was a manhole cover, and as she approached closer to it, she realized that there was something odd about it. It was broken. No, not broken. More like shattered into pieces. I wonder, said Anna to herself quietly, as she crouched down and studied it more closely. Something had to have happened here. Something catastrophic enough for this to be the result. But what? Did he do this? Anna asked the empty room. Or did we? She reached her hand down towards the bottom of the hole. There wasn't anything, just dirt and trash. She dug a few inches and found a bunch of small objects, mostly rocks, but also bits of glass and some other things. But none of them were recognizable enough to tell her what they might have been used for. Anna saw strange materials and things that looked like they had been carved in. Curious, she bent down and examined them a bit more closely. Then, her eyes bulged out of their sockets, and her jaw dropped. It didn't take her long to recognize what those were. These weren't rocks, but bones. Hundreds of bones. Thousands of them. And these bones looked as though they had been ripped straight out of someone's corpse. She could feel her hands beginning to shake. What is this? Who are these people? These skeletons were scattered along the ground, like the remains of a bomb blast. But that was absurd. How could a bomb that powerful have gone off so easily? And who were these people? Why was there a crater in the middle of the town? Why did they all die? Her eyes started to tear up. Was there an explanation for all of this? Were these people responsible for wiping out millions of lives? This was all too much. She was overwhelmed. Everything she had seen so far seemed too unreal, too surrealistic. Then, why couldn't she forget it all and move on? Why did she keep seeing dead people everywhere? Wasn't this world enough? Was it all just a dream? Suddenly, her vision blurred as something wet ran down her face. Anna looked up to see that it was raining. Only, it wasn't normal rain. There was a soot and oil patch on the water that now formed on the ground due to the rain. It rained hard, not light sprinkles, but thick, heavy drops. She didn't want to move from this spot. A wave of fear rushed through Anna's system. As if that wasn't bad enough, her eyes stung. She tried to blink away the pain before it got worse, but her eyelids refused to obey. So she stared back down at the bones. These were human bones. No doubt about that. This wasn't just some random massacre. These were probably people who had come here to search for food, shelter, medicine, and the likes. Yet their bodies were mangled beyond recognition. Like they'd just been torn apart with nothing but their clothes left behind. Anna shuddered and forced herself to look up. She had a job to do, and she didn't want to think about that right now. A quick scan of the area showed her that she hadn't explored much, except the area where she had stood, and where she had covered. She could see that it would take time for a proper investigation to happen, but perhaps that was just as well. A red light began to blink on Anna's suit, signaling that she was almost out of oxygen. She didn't dare waste time thinking about what had just occurred. She needed to get the hell out of this place as soon as possible. Anna pushed the red button. Chapter 3. Anna was a bit shaken with what she had just seen in the future. There was no life, she told David, as she shook with the gray blanket wrapped around her. Nothing was alive. There were only ruins and more ruins, and lots of human bones, and everywhere you turn you see nothing but destruction. There was no sun. The polluted clouds blocked it out. I was the only living thing in the future, and I wasn't even a part of it. My suit was also able to detect the radiation.
We'll analyze it,
David said.
Along with the rock you brought. We'll see the video. Hopefully, we'll be able to come up with something. Or a theory.
How are we going to tell them without revealing my father's time machine? Anna asked. How was she to tell the world of the futuristic threat without letting them in on her father's secret? Her father had died without letting anyone except her and those who worked closely with him know about the time machine. To be fair, she had only gotten to know about the machine today. It was most likely a clear sign that he wouldn't want her to reveal it to the world, as it could be the result of a new kind of conflict, as many may war to want to know what was in store for the future. She wanted to save the entire human race from extinction, but she didn't know how to do that. What would they think if they knew what awaited them in the future? She didn't understand. Why there wouldn't be any signs? Maybe they weren't ready yet. Maybe she would wait until things got settled first before bringing them news of this strange world. Anna looked at the machine.
Seems the only way to have them believe is to show them,
David said.
But as to if your father wanted people to know, I don't know. I believe he saw into other years, but the year 2730 held so much interest for him because he visited it more than once. Only at first, he never stayed for long.
The video I captured won't be enough, Anna said. The rock won't do much either. She took another look at the time machine. Let me try one last experiment, she said. If anything will work, maybe this.
What do you have in mind?
David asked. Anna sighed. Honestly, I don't know, but I should think up something, I guess. And soon. The death and destruction I saw, I'm sure it can be prevented.
Actually, it cannot.
One of the scientists named Len said.
The strange call you recorded with your helmet, that's alien. Unless it was created. We checked the date. It dated back to the years 2700. Means whatever did unfold started long before 2730.
Anna blinked. Wait, really? You sure about that? Len nodded. Anna couldn't help but stare incredulously at the time machine. And she hadn't been able to note that. What else did you notice? Anna asked.
From the study of the skull structure, it was a predator.
Len said. I have to get back in there. We need to know what we're dealing with, Anna said, looking at David.
Agreed.
David said.
Only I feel it would be best if you don't go alone this time.
Anna bit her lip. Okay, what do you suggest?
We need someone else to monitor the area while we investigate and record everything that happens.
David said.
You say it yourself, the rocks were the only evidence you managed to find.
She frowned thoughtfully. She hated the idea of someone else being involved in what had happened to this world. Especially since she suspected this might be something important for humanity's survival. It still bothered her that this was happening. Then, she remembered how scared and lost she had felt when she faced all of that destruction. She shuddered involuntarily. No, she needed to focus on her mission now. If she let herself be distracted by anything else, her research could fall through. Len looked up. Excuse me?
Miss Lewis, I'm sorry. It seems the predator came from future.
Anna asked. Just then, the time machine began to whir, and they all stood. What's happening? Anna took a step back.
Something is coming,
David said. Hey Creepypasta fans, it's Kira Rhodes. Thanks for listening. To connect with and support us, make sure you check out our Discord and Patreon links in the description. And remember, stay cosmic.